everybody. Welcome back. I hope that I can be a nice welcome back into the real world after your Shavasana. Thank you so much to Lauren for taking us through a nice relaxation moment this afternoon. It's so important with all of this high energy stuff going on at CMX that we take a moment to remind ourselves to just breathe and take a moment for ourselves. And with that, let's get back to the high energy stuff. I'm super excited to announce our next speaker to our main stage. She is the Chief Customer Officer at Figma, a cloud-based design platform. She is responsible for all go-to-market functions, including marketing, sales, and support. Prior to Figma, she was the 12th employee at Zendesk and led a number of marketing and sales teams through IPO to $300 million in annual revenue. In this talk, she will discuss Figma's 4-stage approach to community-led growth. She'll share stories of what's worked, what hasn't, and all the lessons she's learned along the way. Please join me in welcoming Amanda Kleha.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's so fantastic to be here, and I appreciate the invite. I'm especially excited to talk to you a little bit about Figma and what kind of growth strategy we've taken, one of which is community-led growth, as Beth talked about. And the story I want to tell you about starts like many Silicon Valley beginnings with two founders and an idea. These two founders had an idea to disrupt the creative software space with a collaborative web-based UI design tool. The problem was they weren't professional designers and they weren't necessarily experts at what designers need. They basically knew that there was a better way to run a design process in a team, but they really needed to start to get to know better and more intimately what was in the heads of designers. So the end of my story actually finalizes with a tweet. And it was a tweet we saw earlier this year after Figma held its first user conference. It went such as, I don't know why, but Figma design makes me feel like family. All the fine people I met at Config 2020, which was our user conference, and all the community reflect a common culture you've developed. Politeness, humor, respect for each other, open-mindedness, passion for learning, creating, and sharing. Hat tip. This is just one example of the kind of community sentiment we've worked hard to nurture. So I've told you how the story starts and I've told you how it ends, but as you can see, the real story is what happens in between. But before I get to that story, I just want to give a little bit of context from my perspective on why community is a powerful growth strategy for any business today. We're in the age of transparency, where anything that happens can be and often is tweeted or live streamed or posted online. And the good news is this level of radical transparency is driving companies to listen more with their customers, their employees, their investors, perhaps, or just any stakeholder. And how people get their information has changed. So the way people communicate's also changed. People get their information from people they already know or even friends of friends. Today they have tools and platforms to make their voices heard that didn't exist even a few years ago. And they share their opinions on things like product hunt, on products. They get questions answered on forums. And the rise of these tools came at the same time as the disintegration of media. Taken together, I think these trends have created challenges for companies, but they've also created some great opportunities for companies to embrace and empower all the diverse voices who engage with their brand. And this really directly applies to our strategic approach at Figma to community-led growth. So let me show you a couple of examples. Example one's another tweet. This is a designer who shares his views on Figma versus one of our competitors. And he follows it up with a clarification that he wasn't paid to tweet this. I can confirm myself too. And we don't pay people to tweet anything. And if you compare this kind of tweet to owned content, if we talk about marketing language, I would argue that this tweet actually wins out on more authenticity and clout. It's a community-driven, unbiased message that just holds a lot more weight than any owned content on our own site. My second example is an in-depth article that a designer wrote comparing Figma to other tools. And he goes into a lot of detail about his analysis and reasons for liking Figma. And again, we were not in cahoots for him to write this. He did this on his own. And we only found out about it after it was posted. But if you compare this article to an earned piece of content, like a professional media story, I think you might also agree that this kind of content also wins out on authenticity and clout. May not have the same reach as Verge or Forbes has, but it's got authenticity nailed. And in marketing, we talk about owned and earned content quite a bit. Owned, like I said, is the content your company produces, and earned is that media content you work for. But I'd like to suggest that one of the benefits of a community-led growth strategy is what I'll call nurtured content, which is really different from owned or earned because it's from your community. It's people who know you and they know your product really well. It's powerful because it's a lot more similar to word of mouth awareness. And it's different than other marketing strategies, but yet it's really scaled because it's greater than one being online and public. It also happens to help a lot with your search traffic, your organic search traffic. So community-led growth for us is about investing in word-of-mouth marketing and this nurtured content. And it really starts with creating a genuine relationship with your community. And many of the best things in life require hard work. So nurtured content is no different. It requires a lot of time and patience. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that process. So I'll get back to my story with that context. So the story has a few stages. Stage one was really the early days of Figma, where we were still developing the product and genuinely really just wanted to learn more from the community that we were trying to target. And the first step we took was to identify a target list of people we wanted to get in front of. And that list was curated not by Googling it, who might be the most influential designers, but rather social media helped. So we looked at Twitter to find out who were influential designers, who had large followings, what people's expertise was, what circles they were talking to. And this exercise allowed us to identify a group of people that we wanted to get in front of. Some of them were at influential companies too, but they had a thoughtful point of view and had different spheres of influence. And then what happened was we started reaching out to these people and asking them if they would take a look at what we were building and provide some feedback. It wasn't about selling the product at that time. It was really just about showing people and getting some reactions and listening. We also at this time hired a pretty respected designer who had a podcast and had him act as an internal evangelist to open up more doors to his designer friends. And it's interesting to note he wasn't necessarily a super fan of the product. In fact, he had quite a lot of critical feedback about the product and also wasn't afraid to share it with people he was talking to. This actually ended up working in our favor because he was so open in telling designers what was wrong with Figma at the time. In addition to what he liked about it, designers trusted him. And this internal evangelist served as a bridge for Figma at this time, ultimately setting the tone for us having really honest conversations with our audience. we were acknowledging both the strengths and the weaknesses of the product and actively listening and incorporating feedback. As I mentioned, it's not a fully fledged product that we're launching yet at this point in time. So the dilemma is, how do you get people to try it out and not necessarily commit to it, but just be exposed to it? And so we had to be creative. And one of the things that you might do during this time is run beta programs. But we also did something fun called, we called it Pixel Pong. And this was where we would invite designers to compete with each other to design in real time in a live stream. So it was kind of a fun way to get both them exposed, but then a public audience exposed to watching people design. So some of the lessons from this stage include finding the people who are going to help you build long-term trust with the community. And I wouldn't treat it like a research project. I would really treat it like you're approaching building a friendship with people, and hiring someone who can help you network and get your foot in the door with the community can be a good strategy. That person should be someone with some connections and is well known and respected and ideally social. But it's important not to be too directive with your internal evangelist, because they may not fit the description of a 9-to-5 employee. You want someone who lives and breathes your community. So you don't necessarily want them heads down working by themselves. You want them talking to people. And you also may not have this employee forever. You might think of it as a time for establishing product market fit. And this person definitely can't be scripted. You're not going to be able to suggest what Instagram posts they post. You need to trust this person to take the story to your audience in a really authentic way. I'd also say, get comfortable knowing you've got more to learn. As you meet more and more of the community, you're always going to take away things from each conversation. And winning your community really starts with good listening. They often will share feedback that you're not quite ready to hear or don't want to hear even, but keeping an open mind is key. It's also worth noting at this early stage, we also hired a community marketing leader to help coordinate a lot of these efforts with the evangelist and the community and do a lot of community marketing herself. And Claire's still at Figma today and thriving because she's really passionate about fostering an authentic and honest conversation with our community. All right, so stage 2, immerse yourself in growing the community and really listening to users. So it's some of the same from stage 1, but just the next level. I think often we're too busy messaging to our users all the time that we forget that we still need to continue to listen to them. And at this stage, we've got product market fit and some early momentum. We also start to see some real super fans and true product experts emerge. And a role that we solidify from that internal evangelist is called a design advocate. And in stage 1, we're connecting with some important influencers, but in this stage, the design advocate isn't necessarily someone who has a really large following, but they definitely have a certain belief in the product and they're a deep understanding of it. The designer advocates at Figma do a lot of different things. They listen to our community and build relationships, of course, but they also run some of our beta programs. They work with our sales team to answer technical questions about the product with customers. They also create a lot of best practice content for the community, and they bring a lot of key feedback from the community internally to influence a lot of features we build. So they're very much the liaisons with super users to build a true collaboration. And in stage 2, we also put our CEO out on the road. So at Figma, 80% of our active users are outside the US, and it was important to him that he meet some of them face to face. So he went to a lot of different countries. This is in 2019, of course, not this year. Nigeria, Russia, Ukraine, Singapore, Indonesia were a couple of the places he went to. And each time he came back with new ideas, new insights, probably even more questions than answers, but definitely energized. And for these trips, we would work with local evangelists to host meetups and invite the community. And it was quite awe-inspiring how many people would show up at these pretty informal events. We meet up with our community every day online, though. In fact, Twitter is sort of like one of the water coolers of our community. And part of what's beautiful about it is it's not just one social media manager representing Figma behind our main brand handle. It's actually multiple people, including our design advocates, our own product design team and brand design team, our product managers, our support team, and our CEO. They're all chiming in to connect and learn with our community. In return for that, I'd say our community feels like they're talking to employees at Figma, not just the brand. So real connections made because the community feels like we're engaging with them one-on-one. Now, at this stage, we also see a lot of nurtured content start to appear, and the community is quite passionate and wants to share their insights on what they're choosing for design tools, how they think about improving design processes, or how they solve design challenges. And we actually do a lot of the same ourselves. So on our own blog, we share very detailed posts of why we built features the way we did, and some of the design decisions we had to make along the way. And that kind of content really resonates with our community. I think about it in a way that we're trying to bring our community along for the ride on product development processes. So we describe things in such detail that our own community is able to articulate what Figma's take is on, say, line height or shadow spread, for example, and why that makes sense. An important part of this stage is also to go back to those early influencers that you wanted to target in stage one and update them on your progress after hearing their feedback and building their suggestions. And I think giving this personal follow-up, even months after getting the feedback, goes a long way to creating a loyal brand follower. And a lot of those influencers are part of our community today, helping spread the word of how they use Figma and what they think of it. And the community definitely keeps things very honest still. It's not always positive, which can sometimes be alarming at times when you're working in public settings, but I think it really keeps things genuine and impactful. So some of the lessons from stage two, at this point, you're still talking to people and trying to personalize things. So you're probably not solving for scale too deeply. You're really winning the hearts by making people feel heard. And I think it's hard. There aren't a lot of shortcuts to it. I also think that putting our CEO out on the road was a great example of being intentional about listening to a very broad and diverse set of voices. I mean, the cities I mentioned weren't exactly the biggest cities in the world, or the ones that you might expect a CEO to travel to. So we're very thoughtful about where we want to get that diversity in our feedback. Yeah, let's go to stage three. Stage three is my last stage, actually. I know Beth said I had 4, but I changed it up. I've got 3. Elevate and amplify. Elevate the voices that reflect your community values, and amplify them by creating a space in the spotlight to shine those thoughts and opinions. And by mid-2019, we're having a lot of momentum and people are moving over to Figma. We're starting to see a lot of network effects from the community. And so it really made sense to us to have our first user conference. And at the time, we planned it to be in real life. And so what we did was we picked a name and a date in early 2020. We did it in February, got very lucky, and put a deposit down on a venue that was about 250 people big. We thought we'd keep it on the smaller side to have the ability to really focus on great content. And then by the time fall came around, we were ready to open registration, and we had grown so much in a short amount of time that we realized we were going to have to tell a lot of people they couldn't come, and that just didn't sit right. Our mission at Figma is to make design accessible to all. And that mission didn't jive very well if our first user conference was going to have to turn a lot of people away. So I think it's an interesting thing to consider with your community is, are you living up to your values and your mission and things that you do? So what we did was we put a second deposit down on a bigger venue and gauged interest because we weren't quite sure. We were also debating how to think about the content. There are already a ton of design conferences out there, and we didn't want to be just another one. We realized that the user conference was going to feel most like Figma if we enabled it to be by the community for the community. So how did we do that? The whole afternoon, you see here just part of the afternoon, but the whole afternoon of this one-day conference was all users that had raised their hand to speak. So we had put out a speaking proposal form, and a couple of weeks later, 300 people said that they wanted to speak on some incredibly diverse topics. So we were really excited to help showcase some of those speakers. We ended up having 1,000 people at that conference, and unfortunately, some of the complaints for the day were long lines and not being able to get into the sessions because it was at the capacity of the place. But otherwise, the overwhelming feedback from the day was very positive, and a lot of it was around how people felt like it was very Figma, very community-oriented. And I think there was a lot of details, even small details that went into making it feel that way. So, for example, simple things like the code of conduct that we published and held people to had a lot of thoughtful community details to make people feel safe and included. Prior to the event, we started a Slack group and invited all the registered attendees. We also invited people to contribute to a square in a digital quilt. We collated in Figma and asked people to design a square to represent what community meant to them, which was really neat. We're also very, of course you would imagine this, very intentional about who spoke at the conference. We had a mix of geography. We also wanted people who had never spoken at a conference before, as well as some experienced speakers too. We had different kinds of people, roles, topics, but we felt like it truly represented the diversity of our community. And so we're proud to reflect that in who was there. And that's actually what brings me to this tweet you saw at the beginning, which is the end, which was about how the conference reflected for this one particular attendee, which was wonderful. And I know that the tweet is the end of my story, but actually the conference was in February, so a lot's happened since then. And I thought I could tell you a little bit about that too. I think communities become even more important during the past several months of COVID times, and they've really had to adapt to a lot of changes and wanted to help each other. And so we've wanted to help them too. And I feel extremely lucky we've had this community foundation to build on. We've kept the user conference Slack account live. We've done things like gotten a lot more active on social channels. We've experimented with live streams. We've shared resources for the community that they've created and that we've created. And we've really focused on how can we help our community best. We've also launched a brand called Friends of Figma. That's for our external evangelists to use to represent their local communities in talking about Figma. And in September, we took Config online with a virtual version that we held to target our European audience. And as you would expect, we took all of our lessons learned and kept with the community-focused approach to the agenda. We ended up getting 10,000 attendees from more than 100 countries. Our users were the target audience for the content. We had a great speaker lineup again from the community. So had a lot of wonderful feedback from that too. So the lessons learned from this last stage are, I would say, creating a space for your users to deepen their connections with each other, whether that's in person or online. I think they really enjoy connecting, helping to elevate the voices that really represent the values you want for your community. And I think it's important to be intentional with which voices you amplify. And finally, in closing, some parting thoughts. I think a community-led growth strategy is quite essential for building relationships with your users and the communities that they represent. Authenticity is super important. We actually judge a lot of our own content by whether or not our community would be proud to be associated with it. It's a good litmus test. So lots of great things that a community strategy can do for your brand and your company, and I'm a big believer. So thank you so much for letting me share my story. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'd love to get to know anyone who's interested to talk more about it. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today on stage. There was some great conversation going in the chat, so you definitely inspired us.